So continuing with talking about the critical area, can you talk about some of the regulations that we need to be aware of involving that?
Yes, this is one of the most frequently asked questions that I have is about the Chesapeake Bay Critical Area. In 1984, the regulations were enacted to protect the Chesapeake Bay. What the critical area is, it is a ribbon of land along the shoreline that is 1,000 feet within tidal waters. It is an overlay regulation, so it is over top of the zoning regulations that every property has, and it restricts development. There's only a certain amount of impervious surfaces you can have on site. It also regulates the stormwater management and just restricts the development at a higher degree than what standard zoning regulations do.
Okay. So basically one of the first questions you need to find out with any property is, are you located in the critical area? Because that's going to be the rate limiting factor as far as what you can do.
That's correct. And the critical area maps were drafted in the 80s. The maps are done, the lines are struck, you're in or out. You can't go and argue that, well, I'm only 995 feet from tidal waters. It's whatever the map says. However, when we do our survey, we will locate mean high water. There is also a 100-foot buffer to mean high waters. Now that fluctuates depending on the survey data that's collected. So there isn't a map that says this is right where your 100-foot buffer is. It's all dependent upon the survey that we get, getting back to having an accurate survey done and having mean high water accurately delineated.
Okay, so going in and talking to planning and zoning will give you an initial first pass, but really in order to be certain of all the details, that makes that survey even more critical.
That's correct. It's a broad brush understanding of, there are 3 different land classifications within the critical area. There's the intensely developed area, limited development area, and resource conservation area. So from a broad perspective, you can figure out which land classification you're in, but whether or not the existing house is, say, within 100 feet of tidal waters, that's going to be dependent upon the survey.
Right. Absolutely. Okay, and then the next sort of category within regulations that we wanted to talk about was zoning.
Correct. So zoning regulations, they encumber all properties in Anne Arundel County. So in 1952, these zoning regulations were enacted, and that mainly tells you what types of uses you can have on your property. So there's residential zones, commercial zones, industrial zones. So you can't have a glue making plant right next to the elementary school. So it pushes certain developments in different areas. So you'll find a lot of industrial zoning near BWI. So that things make sense.
And that's something you should be able to find out very easily prior to going under contract and making.
Yes, so there are zoning maps on file at the county, and it's very easy to look up. And in this day and age, we have the GIS maps. You can go online, punch in the address, and it'll drop a pin right on the property, and you can tell what the zone is. It's all color-coded, very easy to read.
Fantastic. And then to kind of wrap up talking about different regulations, you had also mentioned to me earlier forest conservation areas and even bog areas.
Correct. So there are some areas, mostly in the northern part of the county, that are designated as a bog, and this is very similar to the critical area in the restrictions on, you can't disturb drainage areas to certain bogs. And there's a limit on the amount of impervious surfaces that you can have. Those are a little bit harder to determine because they're kind of uncommon.
Very much so.
The county does have mapping for it, so you can figure it out, but it takes a little bit of digging. And then the forest conservation regulations, we all know they just changed in December.
Right.
But the state regulations have been around since the 90s. So if your property was subdivided after the initial regulations, generally on the record plat, there's going to be a forest conservation easement. So if there's a forested portion of your property, you can't just go and clear it. You need to do your homework and find out whether it's encumbered with an easement or not.
And that's one of the things that is supposed to be disclosed by the seller of any piece of land or any home before you would even write a contract on it. How much do you kind of generally trust that, or what's another way people can
I don't.
verify that?
Yeah, I don't. And because I'm working right now with a client, there was a forest conservation easement. It was missed on their location drawing. When we found it, when we did the survey, it turns out his pool is in his forest conservation easement. So we're working our way through that now.
Through that kind of a challenge.
Yes.
Yeah.
So those are the things that we run across all the time, unfortunately.
Right.